Welcome to The Cutting Floor, a weekly podcast of West Cannon Baptist Church. I'm Emily, and with me is Pastor Tim. This week, your sermon covered Genesis 29, verse 31 through 30, verse 43. Given what the law and the New Testament explain about marriage, why is there no comment about God's displeasure in the marital activities of Jacob, Rachel, and Leah in this passage?
Yeah, I think that's a very good observation because God does not share in this passage, in the text, what he thinks. But I think with God not speaking to the matter, I don't think that he is condoning the behavior or rewarding the behavior. God hates sin, and he hates sinful behavior. And I think when we think about marriage, God has a very specific design. It is one man and one woman for life. And we find that clearly stated in Genesis 2 and in Matthew 19. And obviously, Jacob and his wives were outside of God's design, very polygamous in nature. When we think of this idea, we might even ask ourselves, why would a sovereign God allow this? Could he have not prevented it from happening? He certainly could have intervened, but God permitted it. This speaks to the idea of God being sovereign, and in his sovereignty, he allows man the freedom of choice, and that goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. Some refer to this as his permissive will. So even though God allowed it, even allowed these sinful practices with Jacob and his multiple wives, God uses those for his purposes and his plans. It's so good to know that our God is long-suffering and he is merciful.
If God ensures the promise of the covenant through Leah more so than Rachel, is not Leah as blessed and important in the biblical narrative as Rachel?
Yeah, in regard to importance, I think it's difficult to rank because God blessed both Rachel and Leah, and he blessed them according to the purposes of his plan. It was easy for Jacob to favor one wife over the other. He favored Rachel. It's clear, and probably not for the right reasons. And I think maybe Rachel is even more famous than Leah, if that's the word, probably for the same wrong reasons. But God chose to bless both Rachel and Leah. He chose Rachel, and he gave Rachel the blessing of a son, Joseph, who at the end of Genesis, the last several chapters, 37 through 50, God used him in mighty ways to accomplish his purposes. And Leah was blessed as well. She had 6 of Jacob's 12 sons, who would later become the foundation for the tribes of Israel. From Leah came Levi, and from him the tribe of Levites, who were the priestly tribe. From them would come Moses and Aaron. She also had Judah, who was highly favored and blessed. From him came the kingly tribes of Israel, that would include Kings David and Solomon. And ultimately, through the line of Judah would come Jesus Christ. The line of Jesus Christ, traced back to Judah and to Leah. What a blessing that she was allowed to have. So I don't think there was a ranking or an importance, but God used both Rachel and Leah for his purposes. I think it's also interesting to note, and it would probably require a little more study, but Leah was buried with Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and with Jacob, all of those who were in the line of promise. Rachel was buried on the way to Bethlehem, apart from the others.
What is the significance of God choosing to have Jesus come from the line of Judah and subsequently Leah?
It is interesting to think that God would use Judah in such an unlikely way. While Judah certainly had redeeming aspects to his life, redeeming qualities, including the saving of Joseph's life. He was instrumental in that way. The Bible shows Judah to be a flawed man, a wicked man in many ways. I think even if we were to determine a plan that would lead to the coming of Jesus Christ, we likely would not choose a man like Judah to be part of that plan. But isn't that what God often does? He uses people that are least likely to be used. He exalts those that men would usually reject. And that's what God did for Judah. He blessed him. We think back to Genesis chapter 49, where Jacob is on his deathbed, and he's communicating who God is going to choose for his purposes in bringing Christ. We would think that Reuben would be first in line, being the firstborn, but God rejects him for that role because of his immorality. Levi and Simeon rejected for that role as well because of their violent natures and their killing of people. But Judah was blessed to be in the line of promise. God chose him. And I think that God uses the least likely people to accomplish his purposes, which I think should give us hope that he might even use us.
Why was Ishmael cast away from God's blessing while the sons of Rachel and Leah's handmaids are included in it?
Yeah, it's important to note that while Ishmael was not the part of the line of promise, his father Abraham loved him, as did God, and God chose to bless him as well. In Genesis 17, God is speaking to Abraham, and he says this, "And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac." So again, I think we see that God chooses according to his will. He chooses according to his purposes, and he has the right to do so, because his ways are perfect, they are right, and they are just, and they are perfectly chosen according to his will. I think of the verse in Romans chapter 9, where God says that I will have mercy upon whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion upon whom I will have compassion. Sometimes we might wonder why God chooses the way he chooses. We might even wonder about fairness and justness and equity. But God's ways are always higher than our ways. His thoughts are always higher than our thoughts. Romans chapter 11 says, "Who can know the mind of God?" And I think it's important that we understand who God is, we understand who we are, and that we don't always know the purposes of his plan, but he does. And he is faithful, and he can always be trusted because he is always right.
If you have any questions from the sermon or the sermon passage that you would like to have answered on the podcast, please email them by 8 a.m. on Tuesday morning to questions@westcannon.org. We'll see you next week.